Welcome to Cut Daisies and Unicorns, everybody, and here we are. This is Season 9, Episode number 10. It's number 10.
We got there.
We got there. This is...
It's been a long walk.
The pinnacle, the Everest of Season 9.
And now we move into our next season will be 10 of 10.
Right.
Wow. That's crazy.
Right. It'll be, that'll be quite a pinnacle, too, so...
That
yeah.
If my math serves me correctly, that will be officially 100 episodes.
Yeah.
10 seasons.
Right. Of 10.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it'll be a good... I mean, so that means we'd be at 200 then with the, trailers that we do, so...
So I've been listening to podcasts this week.
Yeah.
And
which you usually don't do, right?
Well,
I mean, it hadn't been a practice before, right?
No. I basically have, eliminated most practices in my life. There's the call to war, and then there's the call to war against yourself. And so, yeah. I really got in the habit of listening to NPR.
Yeah.
Back in Iowa, and then as long as I had the element to drive, well, my truck doesn't have a radio that works. The radio in there is an AM radio.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work, but it's there for aesthetics.
Mm.
But I can plug into my phone and then listen to whatever device thing that's well, then I don't get live radio. So anytime Amy says to me, hey, did you hear? I'm like, the answer is probably not. And so I was actually on my commute today was thinking, I have a record player, phonograph, AM, FM radio in the studio. Mm-hmm. What I need to do is when I sit down to eat lunch, I need to turn the radio on and listen to some live radio. So I can just... I'm so out of touch with the real world.
Yeah.
And our listeners are like, we're very well aware. We are very well aware. But yeah, so yeah, I've been listening to some podcasts. Podcasts don't have trailers. They just have ads for,
they do.
And
there's lots of ads.
Lots of ads. And I don't want to pay money for a premium service.
Yeah, I don't either.
And so,
what I do is fast forward.
Can you fast forward?
You can fast forward through. Yeah.
Not when you're driving.
Oh yeah, that's a little bit harder, but yeah.
Not
completely impossible. But,
not impossible.
But much safer not to.
The preferred way to drive is to actually drive.
Right.
And not be distracted with your devices. Yeah.
There are a couple of ways in which you can still get live radio. So there's the people who own lots of radio stations. One is like iHeartRadio.
Yeah.
And you can pull up lots of different iHeartRadio live stations at the same time. So there's one. So, but if you look at some of the other one, and I don't think any of those are premium, because they're also trying to promote their radio stations. So,
right. Yeah.
So that would be one. I think pretty much all of the. So I know NPR also has some podcast stuff that they do for their individual, wait, don't tell me what is that one, and then
the game show.
Yeah, so then there's a whole bunch of ones that they do a podcast version of it, just like for NPR stories. So that's one
nice.
that you can get some live. I do it's like 10 minutes long every morning. It's from Axios News. Okay. And they do a 10-minute, this is what you need to know today, here's our top story kind of thing, too.
The sky is falling.
Right. Yeah, so that keeps me up to date on some of the news if I'm not catching it or reading it. Wow. It gives you, here's what we're talking, in the world today, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
So that also might be good if you're, trying to be able to capture some of the essence of what's happening. So,
the big thing was Tony Bennett died this week, 3 days ago, and which led us to a conversation that Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett apparently were songwriting buddies and
Yeah.
really good friends. So then Tony Bennett dies, and everybody's talking about Lady Gaga.
Yeah,
and,
come on.
And then guess who's playing Harley Quinn in the next Joker movie?
Mm-hmm. Lady Gaga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
and I think it's because it has a musical element to it. If I'm not mistaken, what I hear from Joker 2 stories is that there's got some music to it. So because of that, I think that they went to the realm of like, hey, look, she's an actress that's also a singer, and let's bring that in.
Or did they sit around a table and say, who would we really like to play Harley Quinn? And that was hilarious, me explaining to Amy who Harley Quinn was.
Oh, so she's not a comic book person.
Yeah, no. No. But so this all bringing to our listener the idea of current culture and how to keep Steve informed.
Right.
Yeah,
keeping you up to date.
If you have my phone number and something big happens in the world, feel free to text it to me because you are going to be my live news feed.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's a way to do it.
Building community.
Yeah. So what should Steve know today? Text him.
I will say though that in a personal practices event over the last. I'm rounding the corner on 2 weeks. I actually have moved into that part of reading more. Yeah.
Which is healthy too.
Oh my gosh. It's super healthy. I just really have enjoyed it. And so I'm rotated between 2 specific books. One I've mentioned before, the Rick Rubin book on creative life. And that book, and then that's what threw me into listening to podcasts because my buddy Nick said, "Hey, you gotta hear Rick Rubin's interview on what the guy's name, like Jay Shetty, I think is
Jay Shetty.
Let me get it here for you, everyone, because he has a #1 health podcast in the world right now, apparently." And so there it was, like right there, On Purpose with Jay Shetty.
Yeah. On Purpose.
Shetty. And a man who looks like he's from India but actually grew up in the UK, and so he has a lovely British accent, and yeah, he just goes through. And so anyway, I just was like, I hear people talk about gut health. I'm going to listen to this. And all of a sudden I'm hearing somebody talk about physics and dynamics and how that we're really not here, but we are. And like how our molecular structure stays separate when we're in the same room.
Yeah.
It was bizarre. Like if you listen to us and you think we're weird, I'm telling you, there's all kinds of information out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're diving into the realm. You might be about maybe like 15 years behind on podcasts, but
I've listened to podcasts
no,
in
I'm
the
just
past.
kidding.
Yeah. I'm not just a co-creator.
Right.
Yeah. Shetty was saying that when they got into podcasting, people were telling him that he probably shouldn't because there were like 70,000 podcasts already at that time. And he goes, now since they've gotten in, now there's like 2.5 million podcasts.
I was going to say, I'm like, now it's just exponentially growing. Yeah. Everybody jumps on.
And what we've stayed committed to is not getting better at all.
We're gonna stay right there in that realm.
We just keep on doing what we do, and we don't try to we're not on any like major station. Hashtag not a sponsor. Don't have any sponsors. I haven't been approached by a sponsor.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there sponsor danger like stranger danger? I think that's a really great question to ask.
Most likely there probably is. I mean, there's lots of sponsors, I mean, that'll jump into our email threads and be like, hey, are you looking for sponsors? And I mean, but a lot of them are where it's like you put this commercial on your podcast, and then if people go and click on the links, it's like the affiliate kind of marketing.
Yeah.
Where they're not going to pay you up front, they'll pay you on the back end, right? They're going to say, yes, we'll pay you when the clicks or the things occur where people actually set it up. So,
yeah. Well, so that's the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Reading. The other thing is I've been trying to work on some stretching.
Oh, yeah. How's that going?
Well, sedentary lifestyle works against you. You know, it's not the fall that kills you. It's the sudden stop at the end. So
it's true.
You know, I mean, you could be scared to death falling, but it's the splat is the effective, this is the end. Right. But yeah, you got to keep on moving. And so, yeah, I've been stretching too.
Yeah. So any particular stretching, practice, or have you been following, or you're just like...
I'm making it up as I go.
Stretch.
I'm just stretching.
Okay.
Just like, I'm like, what part of me is wound up, tight, and not moving very well? I think I'll stretch that.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's a good practice to think.
Basically, it just brings me more in tune with listening to my body.
Yeah.
And paying attention to that. I don't need somebody to tell me what stretch to do. I mean, if my back's tight, then, now some people could argue that by stretching certain parts of your body, it affects other parts of your body.
It's true.
I've found that to be true as well.
Yeah, where I always say, so some of the back stretches, what I would say, I don't always know exactly how to stretch certain parts of my back. So that's why it's always helpful. Like, what are some back stretches out there that would be for your whatever,
Yeah, lower back. Middle back. Higher back. The neck. All of those things.
Yeah, so that's where I talk. I mean, not that somebody has to tell you where to what to do, but mainly I don't know how to stretch that part. So I learned when I had my Achilles stuff going on, I had to learn how to stretch those pieces out that I had a familiarity with, but also learning some of the other current practice of trying to be able to stretch those muscles. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Stretching.
Stretching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it actually is a really good practice to be able to build in. I mean, especially if you're somebody who does work out, I mean, stretching is necessary, right? Because you're working on it, you should stretch.
That person.
Right.
You'd have to be working out to need to stretch.
Right.
This is from the part of that if you're not in motion very much, sometimes, it's just atrophy. It's just the loss of.
Yeah.
So, and another thing I learned from this podcast that I thought, I'll pat myself on the back. I'm like, one of the things that this doctor just really encouraged people to do is to take in beauty. And I thought, you know what? That's something that's I actively do on a daily basis or on, but even they were saying that stem cell stimulation within, I thought you were born with some stem cells and that's all you got. But apparently you can actually activate stem cell growth in yourself. He even brought it to a place of staring into a fire. What it does is it allows for, if staring straight ahead with a fire there doesn't activate stem cell growth. But to look down and to take in the embers, the glowing embers, and to watch that motion within the fire activates within our body stem cell growth. And he's like, hey, if you don't have a fire, you're not burning wood, he goes, take a candle out and stare at a candle, of the flickering of the candle. He goes, or go sit underneath a tree on your back and look up through the leaves, and it's the flickering of the light coming through the leaves on the tree and stuff. Does a very similar thing.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that before.
See, this is why I typically don't listen to podcasts, because I come up with information that I can share with you that astounds you.
Right.
I mean, usually I like to do it with my own ignorance.
Oh, yeah. Which is fun too, but
some people just like we're letting our listeners stretch, because when they shake their heads like, oh my gosh, they did it again. See that you're stretching your neck muscles by shaking your head, and that's what we've committed to.
It's true
of late. But yeah. So I found that like this morning, I was like, my brain's too tired. I just don't even want to. I don't want to deal with a podcast. So Jay, shut the hell up. Which means I just didn't put Jay Shetty on. Yeah, so I listened to music, and then I was astounded again because many of our listeners may or may not remember the late Lou Reed. Now, one of my most favorite people ever in the universe was a major fan of Lou Reed. But Lou Reed's song "Walk on the Wild Side," I got the explicit version. Wow. And all the colored girls sing doot 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 doot. I'm like, yeah, that's quite the song.
You're like, that doesn't fly today, sir. We do not reference people that way.
Exactly. I'm like, what is that all about?
People have been canceled for much less.
Well, he's dead anyway.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure was a manic, depressed individual. If I understand some autobiographical details of Lou Reed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So.
Wow.
Yeah. What else you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating start to the podcast today. That's what I think.
Well, I mean,
there's some stuff that I've learned already here today that I did not know prior. I mean, that's always
16.5.
Right.
I mean, and yeah. So, yeah, in pursuit. Studio update. I had on rubber gloves yesterday for about 5 hours.
That's a long time to have rubber gloves on.
I know. I had wrinkles when I was done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going through a major studio cleanup. And so those Home Depot buckets, the orange pails.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a part where, because I don't have running water in the studio, so I have a little attachment on the sink in the bathroom.
Yeah.
That lets me hook up a garden hose. And I feel like I'm going to tell a joke right now, but
there's no joke that's going to follow.
Like a rabbi, a priest, and a Baptist pastor walk into a bar. Hold it. The Baptist pastor didn't walk in. So
he waited outside.
Had a cigarette. He was Southern Baptist. Yeah, so anyway, got to fill. So I have a lot of these buckets. Well, I have more buckets than I thought I had because, and I've got plenty of dishes that I've gotten at Goodwill. So when I need to make a slurry or glazes or whatever. Yeah. I cleaned out 13 of these buckets that had stuff accumulated in them.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot of buckets.
That's a lot of buckets. The really cool thing about clay and water is clay's heavier than the water, so the sediment drops down. Yeah. So even though you use the water once, you can pour off the clean water on top and use it again. I'm recycling the water that I've already used.
Sweet.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I took rugs home, and wash the rugs, and now I'm gonna wipe the floor. And like, I mean, we're talking.
That's a big cleaning project.
Deep clean.
Mm-hmm.
Deep clean. And you could say, well, if you're cleaning that, what are you avoiding doing?
Don't talk to me, Freud.
And the answer is no. I'm not avoiding anything. I threw five pieces yesterday, and I've got like 21 coffee mugs that I put handles on, and those are drying down, and I really have to build this kiln, and so that's on my list. But anyway, yep. So studio update.
Yeah. Major cleaning in process.
Man, rubber gloves.
Yeah, your fingers must have shriveled. That's like.
Well, I mean, I say 5 hours. It was 5 hours, but during the 5 hours, I mean, like I was in the studio at 8 a.m. and so like, I don't know. I mean, then I had lunch, and you take the gloves off. Like if you're doing another episode on the iPad, you gotta push the button.
Right.
And so, I mean, the gloves came off. The gloves went on.
The gloves came off.
Rubber glovey, you're the one. Yeah.
You make cleaning lots of fun.
Oh, my word. And that's the crazy part was that, with all that cleaning, I didn't even use I haven't even gotten to the detergent side of things. But guess who's stopping by the old, what is that thing? The vault.
Oh.
Picking up my shop vac, and it's going to be time to suck up some clay dust. Hoover me this.
Another
Batman.
Fun project.
Yeah.
Hoovering away. Sucking it all up, the dirt.
Are you traveling this week?
Yes.
All right.
Tomorrow.
Oh.
Wednesday, Thursday. Be back early Friday morning. So.
Wow.
Yep.
You've been on the road.
Yeah. Last week I was on the road. Pennsylvania. It was
Lancaster.
Or Lancaster. Or
they say it
right,
weird.
They do. I'm like, wait, I have
Lancaster.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I've been there and been corrected.
Yeah.
But I stand
Amish
corrected.
country.
Amish country.
Yeah, but something fascinating I learned about this area. Lidditz is the city, and they have this studio there. And a pretty major studio. I mean, lots of like big artists,
like recording,
music. But also, they've got this sound stage that, from what I understand about it, is that maybe an artist who's going to go out on tour would go to the sound stage to be able to practice and go through some of their how does this sound amongst that kind of setting as well. So people like Lady Gaga, since you mentioned it, she apparently was just in this area, but I pulled it up because I had never heard of this, and one of the ladies talked about it. And she's like, hey, if you ever get a chance, while you're here, this is what you should, check out. And, I pulled it up, and it's like something like Rock Lidditz. And there's like a Esquire article that talked about why are you two, blah, 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 coming to Amish country. And so that it brings out and kind of highlights this major kind of movement that people go to. So I found it fascinating that this little area, as we were even driving down some of these streets, like old streets, like 1700s, a lot of these older, some older homes, but there was a Lamborghini that was on the side of the road there, parked. And I was like, oh, you usually don't find a Lamborghini in small town. But, just kind of some fascinating things about
Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
U2, to your point, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, Ariana Grande. The Rolling Stones, Mumford & Sons, Usher, Billy Joe, Maroon 5, Justin Timberlake, Nicki Minaj, Bon Jovi, Beyonce, ... Like there's even more. They've all been spotted in their little town.
Right.
A town of 7,000, 9,000, 9,500. We'll call it 10,000. Yeah.
And then I just heard this news story. They said one of the, actually the number one city where people are retiring right now, or at least county, is Lancaster. And I was like, oh, so like people are coming, to this area, and it's, to me, it's kind of fascinating because there's still a lot of like open land, and there's some farming there, but the Amish there, lots of Amish and Mennonite communities there. And, so part of what I get to do on when I travel is also see areas that I am not familiar with and don't get to see usually. So, yeah. So that was last week, and then it's back to Charlotte this week. So, yeah, it's two areas that I hadn't been familiar with or very familiar with in the past. I probably have driven through the Lancaster area, but I never spent time there. And with North Carolina, I've rarely spent time in North Carolina. So, yeah, so these are, it's the fun part about, business travel. Go to places that you don't know, and you discover things that you didn't know then, so it's all through the lens of just asking questions and saying, hey, tell me about what's happening here. Tell me about your community. Tell me about the things that you know. So, yeah. Nice. So, a little bit of travel, but it all works out.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? In this 10th episode of season 9, we kind of kicked the can around the room, and we kind of landed on, I don't know, a little catchphrase, kind of in a pursuit of discovery. What's the difference between being critical, or a cynic? Are you a critical person if you're a cynic? Are you a cynical person if you're critical? And really leading up to what I don't like to focus, like in on negative, but like, what do you draw on for the source of seeing good in others? And I think where I landed on that and why I was thinking about it was, what is it in me that when I meet others, that I try to see the good in them, regardless of background, creed, color, political affiliation,
right?
And things like that. One of the things that showed up, this doctor on the podcast, he was saying that in his he's traveled over 1.5 million miles around the world, and I mean, I know you travel, but this dude puts on some miles.
That's some major miles.
Yeah, and he said that there's genuinely a positive sense amongst humanity right now. I'm like, that's interesting, because I don't have that sense. Like he even said that there's an excitement within humanity and an anticipation for what's coming. So, and he was like, something's coming. So I don't know.
Something's coming.
So a lot of times we get into the podcast and we're asking people to consider thinking in a different way. And but yeah, so would you consider yourself a cynic?
Yeah, and that's where when we were talking about this topic, I think there's the general sense of like, what do you hear when you hear cynic, right? And cynic, like for me, I think the modern understanding of a cynic is like there's some mistrust or distrust in whether it's institution, whether it's in people, right? I mean, it's like your kind of first inclination is to be able to say, I don't trust anything, that I see, or, and so it would be institution and people. So, for sure, what I would look at with cynic or cynicism would be, I have taken on some of those qualities. People would call me, a cynic. I think not necessarily as my primary characteristic, but there's for sure cynicism.
Yeah, and so like that's the part where like when words get thrown around as labels, and like, are you cynical? Are you critical? And things. Just from the dictionary, cynical, believing that people are motivated purely by self-interest, that there's a distrustful of human sincerity or integrity. And like when I read that, I don't feel like I'm cynical. I like when I see people, I don't like, I don't trust all of you.
Right.
Or even part of, like that's not my interface with humanity. The second one would be concerned only with one's own interest and typically disregarding accepted or appropriate standards in order to achieve them. Now that, I would say that there's an innate part within me that even as a child, part of, I would call it more of a soft skill that I have.
Yeah.
Is the ability to size up what the box is and then invite people to explore outside of it. But that would be like a cynical process.
Right.
According, by definition. It could be the clinical cynical.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's, people have found it very, in my professional life, it's been an endearing trait. People are like, wow, how'd you get there? No, that's good. Right.
Right.
And, the Wikipedia page says a cynic may have a general lack of faith or hope in people who are motivated by ambition, desire, greed, gratification, materialism, goals, and opinions that a cynic perceives as vain, unattainable, or ultimately meaningless.
Yeah.
Now, there may be, and this drops us down into the bucket of nihilism.
Which we have spent some time on a past podcast.
Yeah, talking about it a lot. And there's the part where I just wonder if within the seasons of life, are there different waves of this? Because there is a bucket of meaninglessness that, I would, take things off a shelf or off a table and say, I'm not even sure if this is worth pursuit.
Yeah. Yeah. So giving just an example, of where I've seen, cynicism and kind of how there's a process that usually kind of erodes your hope, right? I mean, so you try to be able to find the glimpses of hope in humanity. But there's a lot of things that teach you otherwise, right? And so for me, coming to Chicago, and I'm not saying it's a city full of cynics, but there's a lot of cynical nature here.
Yeah.
Right. So if you come across somebody and they're saying, "Hey, I need money, and I'm going to tell you this story," and then you're like, "Oh, like sometimes the empathy comes out. You're like, I empathize with your situation. I can see what I can do to help you." Well, then guess what? The next week, you got a different person, same story.
Right.
They're almost like there's people who are passing along the story are like, "Oh, well, I've heard that story,
Huh.
in my head, right? Not telling it, hey, I've
Right,
heard your story, But it's kind of like over the years, then you start hearing some of the same story, and it's hard not to be cynical, towards that, because you're like, yeah, you're just telling me the story that you want me to hear to be empathetic so I can give you whatever you think you need. Right. So it goes towards where that definition says that it's kind of like the, it's eroding the whole, system.
But that would be a bucket of people.
Yeah.
That would not be all people.
Right.
It would be people approaching you who are, so a cynic may have a general lack of faith or hope in people motivated by, probably in this, it would be greed or gratification, what they can get from you. Mm-hmm. And so then they tell the story, and when you see that coming, then you even begin to question, no matter who the person is, when they come with a need.
Right. They're just telling you a story.
Is it a real need? Mm-hmm. Is it a felt need, mm-hmm. perceived need, mm-hmm. or made up need?
Right.
Yeah. You're getting played by the game.
Yeah. So somebody's like, oh yeah, I really, I haven't been able to find a job. Well, then I can pay you to do a job. Oh, no. Like, I just need the money. Then it goes back to, sure. Like, this is your actual motivation, is that you don't actually need what you're saying you need. You just want money.
Right.
Right. Material. Right. And I think this goes back to, I was just looking at that statistic. So 1964, people were polled and said, what's your trust of the government, right? Government as an institution.
Yeah.
Do you believe that they are going to do what they say they're going to do, right? 77% of people in 1964 says, yes, the government is going to do what they said they're going to do.
Right.
Right. So, that is, even out of major conflict, this is post-Vietnam, right? Getting out of that, right? So you're looking at some issues that were already
right in the middle,
and yet they were still saying a majority, 77%, still believed it. Now compare that to today.
Yeah,
24% were polled, right? Now I know polls are polls, and there can be variations in this, but the decline of how many people are looking at an institution like the government and saying, yes, we don't trust them to do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
And so that's like a major decline over, these years of being able to look at and say this institution of government that was once well trusted is not anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think cynicism has played into the role of this, and I'm like, for sure government has done things that has fed into and led us to have a decline in this feeling and thought, for sure. Just like other major institutions like the church, right? It has done some things that has eroded the thought, the feelings that, that we have towards the institution. But I also wonder if cynicism has led it to be embraced much higher.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it was very interesting. I didn't realize before we started the conversation that cynicism is an actual philosophy.
Yeah, which I didn't either until we were doing the research.
Right?
Right.
And so it's actually a Greek philosophy. Mm-hmm. One of the basic ones, and you can look this up, but cynicism basically was a call out. It might be the first wave of anti-everything. Mm-hmm. And basically just saying it was a call to poverty. I don't need all of the things that prop up this world. Mm-hmm. And it was not a call to being a hermit or to be withdrawn from society, but actually to live right in the face of society. Mm-hmm. One of the ways to get through suffering would be to live in the philosophy as a cynic. Mm-hmm. And so people would go around and basically cast off all things. I mean, they would beg purposefully mm-hmm. for their own survival, and they also proclaimed. They would preach their cynical views against society and the people who were of greed, wealth. There's so one of the books that I'm reading is Richard Rohr's Yes and Meditations. And basically they went through his life and listened to all the recordings and stuff like that. And there's a section on transformation. And, he brings out this thing where we are so focused on like achievement and goals mm-hmm. that it's one of those things where like, which is ego driven. Mm-hmm. Or as maybe Freud, if we're going to quote Freud all day long, id, mm-hmm. The id, the I, mm-hmm. and the me that's within me.
Right.
But I really was interested in, he's like, actually, we have three different people. We have the person that we project that we want strangers mm-hmm. and others at work to know. Then we have the person that we let our close friends know. Mm-hmm. Which would be friends, family, your innermost circle. Right. If you find people that you can trust enough to let the first layer be taken away, then you show them the second layer. And then the third person is the person who's really inside us. Mm. That, to quote Daisy Jones, I know why you write the songs you write. You write the songs of the man you want to be, not the man you really are.
Right.
And it actually got me to thinking about this podcast because, I mean, we bear a lot of stuff. I mean, fortunately for you, you're a pastor in a church right now. They're not firing you because of the podcast.
Right.
I'm not sure with all the information that I've set out here, I don't know if a church would ever have me. Just like, and so Amy was saying, she goes, now, do you regret putting that out on the internet? And I'm like, no, no. Like there was a very specific part of freedom. I lived my life so veiled of the things that I would think when I was in a professional paid position.
Right.
There's just parts you just can't let people in on. I mean, like if I really, I just couldn't. I mean, if people knew what I thought about aliens and, I mean, right. Now there's people listening and they're like, yeah, but that's the kind of pastor I really want is someone who can be honest with the thoughts that are going through their head, and stuff like that. That's what I appreciate about our community of faith practice, and that we're like, hey, ain't nobody more weird than all of us. So yeah, let's just get together and be.
Yeah, I think that, trying to be able to understand, and you bring in the ancient philosophy of cynicism versus our modern, right?
Yeah,
and there's a distinguish. The Atlantic had an article, and it said, so the 5th century BC Cynic. It's based on a refusal to accept the assumptions and habits that discourage people from questioning conventional dogmas, and thus hold us back from this search for deeper wisdom and happiness. So here's an example that they give. He says, whereas a modern cynic might say, for instance, that the president is an idiot and thus his policies aren't worth considering, the ancient cynic would examine each policy impartially. The modern cynic rejects things out of hand, while the ancient cynic simply withholds judgment. So modern cynicism as the way that we would categorize it, would dismiss things in like a whole thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The president, reject, right?
Right.
But the ancient cynic would say, no, we need to understand what we're rejecting. We're going to reject the thoughts, the actual things that are occurring, and not just people. Or I would even say not just institutions. And so I think that there's something going back to that and understanding, like the ancient understanding of a cynic is much different than the way that we would understand it today.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't think if you're listening to the episode and you're like, well, yeah, I'm a cynic and I'm not going to change, or I will, like, I would challenge that thought process. Because I really, when I ask the question, cynic, critical, what are these things? Like, there's that part in me that I'm like, I see good in people. Yeah, there's horrible people in the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are, but not all people are horrible. And this is another thing. And maybe this is like an awakening within me from listening to the podcast. But is your circle closed or open?
Right.
And so they used the example of blue zones. Have you heard of blue zones? Mm-mm. Blue zones are places around the world where people live to over the age of 100. Mm-hmm. Healthy, vibrant lives. 100 and beyond. Mm-hmm. Blue zones. Hmm. And so anyway, this guy was visiting, and he was at a Grecian island in one of these blue zones, and he made a toast at the end of this 5-course Grecian dinner, and just talked about how fantastic the food was, and people, what is it? Is it the olive oil that they use to prep, or what gives them this longevity, and all this stuff. And after he got done with the toast, he goes, people were crying and all this stuff, and the man of the house said, "Doctor, you have it all wrong. Our longevity has nothing to do with the meal. Has nothing to do." And he came back and said, he goes, "You know what? We've studied it. It's true. These blue zones, they don't have a common denominator of what they're eating."
Mm-hmm. So it's not the nutrition.
It's not the nutrition. Mm-hmm. It's the approach. He goes, when we meet for coffee in the morning, we don't ask each other, what did we have to eat? We ask each other, who did you get to eat with last night? He goes, my wife and I always set an empty chair in anticipation and looking forward to breaking bread, having a meal with someone we don't know. Mm-hmm. And the difference is, if you're in a closed circle, mm-hmm. all that you get is the information from the same circle. Mm-hmm. But if you have an open circle, the vibrancy of what is breathed mm-hmm. is the equivalent of adding new. And I'm going to say it this way, and people are going to think this is really weird, mm-hmm. but it's like it's like fertilizer from the universe.
Yeah, it's
feeding you at a level that is not understood. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I find that fascinating, because when I look at when I enjoy life the most, mm-hmm. no, I didn't say joyful or happy. Right. But when I enjoy life the most is when new people are coming in and out of my life. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy that. Now, I'm kind of a bashful person. If I step into a room of people that I don't know, I won't be the first person to go up, slap somebody on the back, and introduce myself. Mm-hmm. I got to scope the joint.
Yeah, but I think that's an interesting concept of the open circle, but even just the idea of the empty chair.
Yeah.
Right. So And to me, it also brought me back to Judaism with, Passover meal is that they keep an open chair for Elijah.
Yeah.
But that can extend in that same way where even within religious communities, whether, some people talk about Bible studies or life groups or whatever, is that even the extension of that is to be able to say, well, we're going to keep a chair open, meaning this group isn't closed.
Right.
It's open all the time.
Yeah.
So what are the experiences that we could have with somebody else?
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same concept, but like putting the pieces together and actually having the openness, right, part of it instead of the closed part.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think I think it's a great way to be able to consider, a different perspective, right? So we keep the table open.
Yeah.
We keep the chair open. We keep the conversation open, the relationships open, and then we don't have to automatically distrust somebody who might sit there, right?
Or that just because someone's approaching you doesn't mean that they want something from you. Mm-hmm. If you've been conditioned that every time you're approached, mm-hmm. that somebody's coming to want something from you,
yeah.
Then what I would say is, what is within you that they need?
Right.
Not what do you have. What is within you? We were at the beach on Sunday, and there was a family, and man, I tell you what, there's one family, they were lovely, 2 little ginger kids, little girls with red hair and fair skin and playing in the water and scooping sand. And then another couple with kids came in, and this lady's voice carried. I have all kinds of information about this lady whose name I still don't know.
Yeah.
But as we were wrapping up and gathering our chairs, their little guy, they were eating sandwiches, mm-hmm. and they had they look like, little Subway sandwiches or whatever. Mom had packed for the kids, and the seagulls started coming in. And man, this little guy, he was freaked out because the seagull was kind of circling. The seagull could smell the sandwich, mm-hmm. and was hoping that this little guy would throw some bread out, mm-hmm. And I was watching, and I just chuckled, and the mom caught me chuckling at her son. Mm-hmm. And we were gathering stuff, and she came over, and she's like, I just have to tell you. And I said, what? And she goes, our little girl Phoebe, when she came down to the beach and saw you, she looked at me and she said, Mom, Santa Claus is here. And I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, I said, my secret's safe with you. I said, so whatever you need to do, you feel free. Mm-hmm. And she goes, oh, you're serious? I'm like, sure, it doesn't hurt me. And she's like, this is going to be a blast. So then Phoebe starts walking over, uh-huh. and the mom looks at the little girl, and she says, hey, now we're going to let Santa Claus enjoy his vacation. She goes, but you were right. And so you just stay right there because we're having discussions about December. She played this whole thing in. And, so are you open to others approaching? Mm-hmm. Are you willing to approach others? Yeah. And, it was an exchange. Did I learn the people's names? Did I make deep friends? No, but there was an exchange. Mm-hmm. And that's all I'm pointing out is that there can be exchanges, and, who knows? I might have a new job offer coming up in November
for Santa.
Yeah.
So and going back to that, I think it then ties in with the blue zone concept, right? So the blue zone, these people are living, right? And so going back to some of the research that's been done, modern cynics, through the research, believe that they are going to have a much poorer health. So if you look at modern cynics, so this 2009 study researched the negative cynical attitudes, and it basically found that it was going to lead them to a path of being depressed, right? So depression was going to be a staple on their life.
Yeah.
Because of the cynical thoughts, feelings, and attitudes of people, institutions, whatever.
Yeah.
91, they did a research on middle-aged men, found that the cynical outlook significantly increased the odds of death from cancer and heart disease, possibly because these cynics consume more alcohol, tobacco, and in 2017, another one talked about this middle-aged Finnish men, which is, lots of studies on men as being cynics, so maybe we fall towards that.
We come by it genetically.
Right. They predicted premature mortality. So when you're seeing these blue areas, I think it's something to be able to bring in and consider. I mean, that if we're living the cynical lifestyle as a modern cynic, not as an ancient cynic,
right,
that many times that it's going to have a negative impact on who we are, which is why I would probably say that most of America is probably not a blue zone.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, it just, I don't know. There's just this like turned corner of, taking a look and what is our view? Mm-hmm. How are we looking at things? If what we're, I would have to think that an intentional part or process in regards to our outlook towards others, mm-hmm. Would just like, if you start thinking about it and you start noticing, this is where this journey of discovery gets so cool. Mm-hmm. Because then, you're able to be open to and see. And I don't know. I think it's super interesting.
Yeah. And I think that what leads to this idea of modern cynicism, and we look at, the being critical, right? So critical thinking somehow has also been linked to, people would see cynicism and critical thinking as like this tie-in. Now, where we would say is that is a cynic going to be critical? Yeah. Right. There's part of that, but critical thinking apart from wouldn't be the end all definition to the critic wouldn't be automatic. They're not going to just be the same.
A critical thinker or having the skill set of critical thinking is not the same as being a critical person.
Right.
It's not the same thing. And that's where we get to, on these airwaves, parse the words of the English language.
Right.
Critical thinking is the intellectual discipline process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, or evaluated information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. Mm-hmm. At Gloria Day, there was an employee there, and I said, "Hey, listen, dude, I get paid to think critically, to be a critical thinker around this table." He's like, "Yeah, I don't think you're thinking anymore. I think you're just critical."
Oh. But that's where I think then also the modern cynic would say that, right? I mean, because the modern cynic sees the criticalness of others and says, "Oh, we must be the same," and so being a critic doesn't necessarily mean you're a cynic. I mean, I think it's where understanding this ancient philosophy
right.
actually says no, we can be a critic without being a cynic.
Yes.
And to be able to say, I'm not going to question humanity, but I am going to question a policy, or I'm going to question a motive, right? So you're critical of some pieces instead of being just a cynic towards everything.
Right.
And I think that's the differentiation here that we try to be able to bring is is it okay to have some criticism of things? Yeah. We should point out, hey, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a critic of this policy or this move, right? I can be a critic of it without throwing everything. And, we've talked about that in the past too.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Well, in top 5 things of critical thinkers, they ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
They gather information. They think through solutions and conclusions, and consider alternative systems of thought, and then communicate effectively. I think that when you look at that, there are, parts that we have talked about systematically throughout the podcast, mm-hmm. of things that we would encourage people to do, and not head down just because there's a whole motion of society or culture moving towards on one topic in one direction, mm-hmm. And then on the other side, hopefully people pick up on that just because there are people out there who don't think like you think or don't think like I think. We've been very specific to say that doesn't make them our enemy. Mm. And so, right. Then when we can move towards others and see that someone who is different than me is someone as valuable as me, mm-hmm. in that motion, then that exchange is an exchange that allows for a continuation, mm-hmm. that may move to community.
Right.
But even if it doesn't, the open chair doesn't mean that the people are going to move in and stay.
Right.
But there is an opportunity for the adventure being set. Mm-hmm. And so...
Yeah. And that's where I'm thinking, so when you're, how do we move from a place of, extreme modern cynicism into a more open nature of, the world itself? How do we move from there to there?
I think that's an internal work.
Mm-hmm.
I think where it starts is it starts from within you to say, at some point, do you want to be an open person? Face that question first. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to be an open person, guess what? You're not going to be.
Right.
But if you're a closed person and you want to open, then find out what has built up within you, mm-hmm. that has closed you off to others.
Yeah.
And that's where where Roar would come out and say that it's in that you can't keep that within you. You have to take that outside of you. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't, even though you haven't talked about it, you will transmit it.
Right.
And that's what I draw to. That when I know when I'm closed to people. When I was going through the Aldi store, and the shelves were about empty. Because there's a snafu in the supply chain based on computer, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. All right, great. That doesn't help me when I'm looking for pork tenderloin.
Right.
So anyway, but there were people around and interactions and stuff of, making our way through the aisles of the grocery store, and which if people are picking up on this, they have to realize most of my socialization happens when I go grocery shopping or shopping period. But in that, as I walked out to my truck, there's a lady who was bagging her groceries, and when she came up to her vehicle that was parked next to the truck, she's like, I wondered if that was you. Now,
so
I can
it's
do
another experience with Steve and his truck.
Yeah, but I can do one of two things. I can turn, it wasn't this, like, you either ignore it or you're open to it. Mm-hmm. And I just turned and said, yeah, this is me. She goes, I always wanted to build I don't know what she say, a wood-floored pickup truck, with my dad and me and my husband. That's on our bucket list and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you know what? Mm-hmm. I said, the only way you can work through your list is if you take it one step at a time. I said, this is a lot of fun to drive, and I meet a lot of really interesting people. Mm-hmm. And, and now those stories, will fill pages of, just really cool people that I've gotten to meet. Mm-hmm. Why? Because I'm open. Right. On the flip side, if I don't want to talk to anybody, I just close up and I'm just, doing my whole thing. So, you get a Beardo story and you get a truck story all in the same thing. And what I would say is, and projecting, whichever person of me it is that's talking about this right now, it's like that does what I'm not saying that I'm open to everybody all the time. Mm-hmm. There's the flip of the switch, and so what are you open to? And do you have somebody in your life that you can have these critical thinking conversations with? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that this article again is pointing out with the Atlantic is saying if we're switching from this modern cynicism, which leads to health challenges and I would say even overall a destructive force, because I think you'd see a lot in our conversations in the civic realm, right? Is that cynicism plays a big role. So if we're saying, hey, let's move from here, so they pull out 4 kind of key areas for what did the ancient cynics continue to bring in. And as they pointed out, some of it sounds very Christian, or as you would look at even Buddhist, right? So there's some of those things you go back to. All right. So the first one is satisfaction, right? So if I can't get no right, and it does every time you hear that word, you can think of the song, right? So happiness can only come, when we are from detaching ourselves from the world's false promises. Right. And so if we're thinking always like, yep, this is going to promise this, and oh yeah, but what we say and what the ancient cynics would say is, I'm not going to be subjugated to this desire. So if I end up getting this thing that, is like, that's pretty cool. Like if you get it, you still can say, but this desire should not be attached to my outlook, the other things that are happening. So satisfaction is a big one. Discipline is a part of that, right? We can't clear our mind of confusion until we stop trying to kill the pain. So whether it's with drugs, alcohol, idle distractions from real life, right? Every day, forego a detrimental substance or habit. Instead of watching television after dinner, go for a walk. Instead of a cocktail, have a glass of water. Consider the refreshment you get from every sip. The discipline promises to strengthen your will and help you adopt routines that improve your happiness. So this is like, so it's saying discipline comes in a part of that life of the cynic as one of the pillars. The third one, self-sufficiency. Relying on the world, especially on getting approval from the world, makes the true freedom impossible, right? Because you're looking at, right.
So true, right?
Right. So refuse to accept your cravings for the high opinions of others. And it's a hard thing.
Yeah.
And so that's a self-sufficiency, a cosmopolitanism, which, is kind of an odd word to throw in there. But seeing ourselves as better or worse than others sets us against one another and makes love and friendship difficult, which is self-destructive. So this can be as obvious as thinking I'm better than someone else because I was born in this country, or as subtle as a feeling as slightly superior to a colleague because of my academic affiliation. So act exactly the same with your boss that you do with your barista even. They use the B's, right? It's always good to have that. So when you're looking at the world, you're not going to say, all right, now I need to size myself up.
Right.
Like with this group over here, I've got to think differently, act differently, talk differently, but it's saying consider the world, and you're going to come across all kinds of different people. Are you going to be the same, with them? And so that's the four kind of pillars that they're bringing out in that.
And I think that that's beautiful. I mean, they bring that out, but see, there's a part where technology is great to have. Mm-hmm. All right? There's another part where the depth in the ancients is just incredible.
Right.
I mean, if we gave you a half hour, I bet you could proof text that list out.
Probably.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And so this just wraps back into the conversation of, Phil and I, like there's a part of that the path that we're on in the spiritual journey that we've landed willing to walk on a path, but it doesn't mean that it's a closed path, that we're only going to think the way other people are telling us to think about that, but that to be able to grab on in discovery. And in that, like, what good thing. You know what I did this week was my new goal? I know we went through some things at the beginning.
Yeah.
But so this week I am setting a PM alarm at 9:30.
Yeah.
So that just as a trigger for me to say, you know what? It's time to wrap the day up. Get to bed at 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm. Then I have my AM alarm. And that AM alarm is set for 6:30. Mm-hmm. Because in hopes that I would be able to be out the door by 7:30 to be down. Now, here's the push-pull. Here's the reward. If I'm here by 8-hour day, I don't need to work 10 and 12-hour days to be more tired, to have to feel like I need to more relax, right? And so, like, with that, what my hopes are be, because, like, Amy's got a work event tonight, and so I have a decision to make. Do I stay later at the studio? Or do I quit at my normal time of my 8-hour day, and then do I choose a healthy way to relax alone instead of an unhealthy way? And so I haven't made the decision yet, because technically we're here doing the podcast. And by the time I get to the studio, it'll be noon. And if I want to put in 8 hours, I can work till 8. Or does that not lead to a good way to wind down for the evening to be ready to go to bed at 10? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these are all, just different parts. But it is the discipline of going to bed. It's like the idea of breathing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes why we can't lose weight isn't because of the caloric intake, and it's not because of the food. Mm-hmm. Sometimes why we can't lose weight is because of how we're breathing.
Yeah.
If we don't exercise thoughtful exhale, inhale, to take in, to feed our bodies, our bodies think that we're in flight mode. What does a body in flight mode do? It keeps. Mm-hmm. It doesn't let loose of, because it wants to have reserves for when the time comes that food is not available.
Right.
And so learn that on the podcast too. Yeah. Hashtag so, good stuff, right?
Yeah. But so then leads to scarcity, right? So like I'm going to run out, and so I need to keep.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the thing is that he says, yeah, when I do these classes, he's like, I tell everybody, breathe in. Mm-hmm. Well, he goes, the problem is I didn't tell you to exhale. You make more room for air by exhaling. Mm-hmm. So then I show people how if they exhale, then when they inhale, the capacity that they take in is far greater.
Yeah.
But if we're shallow breathing, mm-hmm. our body thinks we're in flight mode.
Yeah.
And so, just like this, you can't plan to get up in the morning if you're not going to bed at night. Mm-hmm. So you got to start with get the rest, then get up. And seems like simple things, but to your point about discipline, these are the things that sometimes you have to just break it down. So, anyway.
Yeah, I think we have broke it down, and so I think that the word from I think us today is trying to be able to say, like, if we've seen a general sense of both cynicism in us, but also that's happening, through, I would believe many of our listening ears, you would find really easy ways of being able to say, yep, cynicism is alive and well. But to be able to say, all right, so what's the difference, and how do I be able to do some of that internal work of saying, I am completely a cynic, modern cynic, not not pre-modern.
Right.
But they're not the ancients. But how do I make the move of being able to identify it in me so that I can find the ways of finding health elsewhere?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big switch that's just going to take, a lot of work in order to get there. Because much of this cynicism has been ingrained, in us.
Well, and then that moves into the conversation we had earlier in this season, which you can go back 2 or 3 episodes in regards to just the whole idea of how is culture influencing and how are we picking up. See, and just like we talked about, hey, if you don't get this outside of you, you're transmitting it. Well, I think that's what we're doing mm-hmm. as a pool of humanity.
Yeah,
we're transmitting. And the things that we're taking in, are things that we're putting out, and so there is a call to let's do some cleansing of our souls, cleansing of our bodies, and mm-hmm. Start setting a chair. Mm-hmm. Get out of the closed and get into the open.
Yeah, that's good.
All right,
I think it's good for everybody to be able to hear that too.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. Well, hey everybody, I have to say this has been enjoyable. Yeah.
I think it's a good conversation, and I think it leads to more questions of what's it going to take to get there, right? And so I think can lead to more conversations in your life and in your world if you are open to it, right? Open to have people speak into it.
Yeah.
So let's consider openness and not closedness.
Already, Freddie. That sounds good to me. Well, hey, if you have any questions, just remember you can get a hold of us through the email address, cutdaisiesandunicorns@gmail.com. And we would love to hear from you, your thoughts. Maybe there's some insight that you'd like to share with us. And as always, just remember, we're not saying one way or the other. We're saying yes and.
Building in the roar, yes. Yes, and. All right, everybody, be well today and continue to find ways of being well. Mentally fit.